Dude, it's like we got a convenience store down there. What all do you have, Kirk?
I have
You got cherry Coke.
Coke Zero, which is going to kill me
Cherry?
quickly. Cherry Coke. I've got your Bigs, cracked
Awesome.
pepper, which they're not as good as David's, but
They're
in a pinch.
they don't crack as easily. They're a little more pliable.
What do you think? Who uses what seeds have more dominance in the Major League Baseball?
Probably David. See a lot more David packs. But that's
Well, the Stros need to eat some more Davids, damn it. What the hell happened last night?
I watched the game. That's the problem. I haven't been watching
Stop
much of this
doing
series.
that,
I
Chuck.
won't. I'll watch on the iPhone
It's-
today like I've been doing.
I was at Kirby Ice House Friday,
Dude.
start to finish. One of the best games I've ever seen, and failed to rally and get back there last night. So it's
That's your
It's
fault.
on you. Yeah.
well, it's half on me and half on you.
You
You shouldn't have
care-
watched it all.
You care more.
And I had to kick a friend out of the UT game this weekend, and the Horns actually came back and ended up winning. Not that they're ever really down, but I told him to leave the stadium because he was screwing it up.
Will you tell me just how much was the UT payment to the refs to get that call at the end of the game?
Hey, Chuck.
I just want to
there were
price it.
there were some really good memes floating around after that.
The lost odds, we don't want to play U of H at U of H because of some ticket, like we're guaranteed a certain amount of tickets. U of H Stadium's not big enough, blah, blah, blah. We want to play at the Rice Stadium. Thank you, Chuck. Everyone does. We all
Yeah.
want to be at Rice. U of H said no. Actually, the Big 12 commissioner. So we had to play at U of H. And damn, we barely got out of there.
That was
we
your
had to
that
pay
was your
people.
parting gift from the Big 12 commissioner.
And yours got hurt, which I'm actually okay with, but that's just me. All you yours fans,
Wow.
let's take this offline.
Wow.
Yeah, go to Twitter. People have been watching my Twitter, and they're like, God, you're on a roll against
You
yours.
kids, what, 19?
So
Yeah.
if you're gonna play in the big leagues,
All right.
right, Chuck?
So
There you go.
so what does this do to CFP? And I guess it depends on Big 12 championship ultimately.
I think Texas is going to beat OU, but the fact that they barely got out of U of H should make a lot of people question their rankings. But that's just me.
So
Ohio State, Penn State was close. So
Yeah, I mean,
my favorite quote about this, my former brother-in-law used to always talk about how wonderful the University of Texas was and would denigrate my Rice Owls. My line was always, please try building a sports program without the taxing authority of the state of Texas behind you, and then you can talk some smack.
look, we love Rice, and a good friend of mine that actually played linebacker at Rice, we're tweeting during the UT Rice game. He goes, why are we even playing Texas? I'm like, that's a good question. That's a good question.
That is one of the coolest things, I know I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but I'm going to do it again, is the Man on the Moon speech that Kennedy gave was actually delivered at Rice Stadium. And anyway, the copy of that speech, back in the day, they didn't have the iPhone, they didn't have the computers. You got your speech printed out and handed to you. So it's typed written.
Mhm.
It's on the typewriter. And his speech, and when he goes into that, why do we climb the highest mountain? Why do we do that? Kennedy actually delivers the line, why does Rice play Texas? And then he delivers the famous line of, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Well, the coolest thing is he had obviously gotten to campus. He had figured out a joke, and it's handwritten in Kennedy's handwriting
Really?
in pen, why does Rice play Texas? And you can see that in the Kennedy Museum in Boston.
I know there were two big events. I mean, Texas at U of H. We had Astros, but we had a roast that I was supposed to attend, and I actually didn't tell you guys. I left the water running in the second floor sink.
yikes.
Long story, it was my fault. But
Ooh, sorry, Holly.
when I looked on Twitter, someone gave you kudos. Like, is it public now?
I don't know.
I saw the public.
I was a little
Babe,
shocked.
I was like,
I saw
Yeah.
the.
And I didn't respond to it. I wanted to, but I was like, whoa, was this a slip? Let's give it an hour or two. It's
I
still
don't
there.
know. I think it's still there, and I reposted it.
So did the GF see you in your glory? And it's like, I'm actually going to stick to this wagon for a while.
So she saw me in my glory at the roast, and there was lots of PDA at the roast. Every time I saw her, big kiss.
Wait, she was claiming you.
Yeah, she was claiming me, I think.
We'll set it up. I want to hear about the roast.
All right. So YDC, the Youth Development Center, after school literacy program. We say it's for Houston's 5th Ward, but that's probably not the best marker. It's slightly more north of
Better
that,
not be
but
3rd Ward, because that's where the horns barely escape. So let's
just
keep money out of there.
It's a little north of that, obviously an economically disadvantaged area. We've built a big, huge building over there. We run after school literacy. The punchline is if a kid will spend a year in our program, they'll increase their reading and comprehension scores by 2 to 3 grade levels.
Wow.
Done an amazing job over there. And for the last 16 years, we have financed the YDC operation by throwing an annual roast. And we've had the who's who of the energy business sign up to be Men of the Hour. We had Ken Hirsch. We had Mike Lynn. We had Will Van Lowe. We had Ted Collins. I mean, Billy Quinn. And this year, the Men of the Hour were actually 4 the Rice brothers, Danny Rice, Toby Rice, Derek Rice, and Ryan Rice. And they were gracious enough to be good sports and get beat up on. And we raised just over $1 million. So
wow.
The center runs again for another year. That's how we always say it.
Quite entertaining.
Yes, it was. And the key to the whole event, we yonder. Do you guys know what yonder is?
Mm-hmm.
Where you put the phone into the pouch there, lock it up so no one have your phone. So I was up on stage. I took your phone away. I took your phone away. So,
Did they make a clear version of those? The
the
Astros were playing. You had it on the screen, and then the roast starts.
Yeah. If you had a clear thing, you could take pictures, and that's what you're trying to avoid.
What about the Apple Watch?
I don't know about that.
I mean, you can still tweet and do shit on that, but you can't take pictures.
Maybe. I hadn't thought that much. But anyway, you're kind to ask, who's kicking off the big news of the day? Is it you, Mark?
Sure. We're back to merger Monday. I think it's pretty well known at this point. Chevron and Hess announced an agreement to merge in an all-stock transaction, $53 billion. What's notable and different about this one is really the asset location. Primary asset in the Hess portfolio is in its 30% interest in the Staybrook block in Guyana, offshore, which Exxon operates. About 11 billion barrels of gross resource potential, I think on the order of 400,000 barrels a day of current production. Going to well over 1 million. The FPSO ramp up and commissioning is ongoing. A lot of both exploratory and development upside. So these are very high margin barrels. It diversifies Chevron out of a pretty high degree of concentration in the Permian, and also gives them assets both in Guyana and in the Bakken that have an overall CO2 intensity, or each respective asset area has a CO2 intensity in terms of per barrel footprint that is better than Chevron's 2028 overall portfolio targets.
Hey, Mark, where is Guyana?
It's just offshore South America on the northwestern side of the continent.
Correct.
Guyana, Suriname. You've got the whole Guyana basin that really continues on into the territorial waters of Suriname.
It's almost exactly opposite Ecuador. Why do I bring up Ecuador? Because have you seen the new president, 35-year-old president, who is heir to a banana empire?
No.
Well, his wife's like a 25-year-old bombshell.
Oh, really?
And the two of them together, amazing. I'm like, damn. Couldn't have drawn that out myself.
Because it worked out really well for Canada, so we'll
That's
see.
exactly.
We'll see how this goes for Ecuador.
So Guyana, it's right next to Venezuela. This is correct.
Correct.
And I mean, right? I mean, generally acknowledge this is the sexiest, best margin, fastest growing oil province on the planet, right?
Yeah, I think it's the best visibility. One of the bar charts in the presentation that was made this morning, I misread 7:30 Eastern for 7:30 Central and missed the webcast, but I was a little surprised to see it was one of those unitless cash flow from operations per BOE broken out by asset area, both Chevron Legacy, Hess Addition, and then combined. I think the only one of which the two had overlapping assets to any meaningful degree is in the Gulf of Mexico. But the cash flow from operations per BOE for Guyana significantly higher than anything else in the combined portfolios.
So if Chevron is paying $53 billion for these assets, and Exxon's paying $60 billion, who got a better deal, and why? It's basically same price tag, but are we getting more oil, higher margin oil? What are we getting here?
Well, I think you look at the risk profile of Permian versus offshore Guyana, deep water, quite differently. Too early to answer that question, but on balance, if the Chevron hierarchy as presented with the investor deck about the leverage to per unit cash flow is as is shown directionally, then you've got, much higher cash flow growth leverage in a Guyana type of asset.
And just thinking about all the downstream, is Guyana heavy oil versus sort of the
no,
crude?
It's not heavy. It's from to my knowledge, it's kind of mid to upper 30s API.
So it's not Venezuela.
light sweet being around 41.
It's not Venezuela oil.
No,
even though they're close.
So Kirk, to answer your question, and Mark, what do you take on this? Did Exxon get the better deal with Pioneer, Chevron the better deal with Hess? I think it's like saying I bought front row tickets to My Chemical Romance and Mark bought front row tickets to the World Series. They each got the thing they wanted the most, right? Because what Pioneer allows Exxon to do in the Permian Basin, 4-mile laterals, et cetera, all that, does more for them than potentially if Exxon picks up Hess. Fair analogy there, Mark?
Yeah, I think Exxon needed some acceleration assets in its portfolio. The runway, if you will, in Permian was shorter than it is for Chevron pre-Pioneer. And so, how that is ultimately treated will be reflected in the multiples, right? And it's it's certainly too early to tell. Today's a bit noisy because of what's going on with crude prices and all these external things like Venezuela, sanctions lifting, et cetera. So I think that's a fair way to think about it.
Okay, let me ask a different question then. If you were an employee of Hess or an employee of Pioneer, which one would you want to be and why?
I think we're so people starved in the industry that I think both sets of employees are going to be pretty valued. That said, if you're worried about redundancy, obviously it's kind of Exxon Pioneer, being a Pioneer employee. One of the jokes I may or may not have made at the roast was I had this running shtick about, you want to know what's going on in the industry? You come to the roast, right? Because I said, look, over there, the Pioneer table, the Exxon table, they're over there drawing straws to see who keeps their jobs.
Yeah, the one thing about the Guyana asset is that Hess didn't operate, Exxon operates the Staybrook block. So you've got now two powerhouse working interest partners, but Exxon dominates from its operating position, which is a consideration in terms of opportunity. I mean, you're not necessarily going to staff a non-operated asset as heavily as you would an operated asset. So what does that mean?
So did Darren call Mike saying, hey, welcome to the family, or what?
Or what? If that phone call even got made, or what?
What?
So, part of what we're seeing, I think, is a disappointment. Chevron talked about it a little bit in its prepared comments about how all of these recent transactions kind of in the midst of and following COVID have been at about a 10% premium relative to whatever benchmark, near-term benchmark, trading benchmark you want to choose. And so if you look at things like forward multiples on earnings and EV to EBITDA, there's quite a bit of an advantage in Hess, trades at premium, both on earnings and EV to EBITDA to Chevron. So, part of that reaction is a 10% premium in the value that's being ascribed in the transaction, plus the synergies that are going to be realized, run rate kind of $1 billion a year after the close in the first half of next year. That's all a little bit betting on the come, I guess, but clearly they're buying some really robust per unit cash flow assets with a good growth profile.
I mean, that was Ben Dell's from Kimmeridge, his deal. Gosh, when did he write that paper? He may have even written this paper pre-COVID. It might be 5 years ago, saying, hey, E&P, you need to consolidate, do zero premium mergers, just because we need to get rid of the stuff. And so it's kind of played out, because that's, if there's been a thread that I've seen on CNBC, because I watched some of it this morning, looking on the thread on Twitter, etc., there is a vibe of, man, Hess just didn't get enough of a premium for this.
Interesting.
But
we need to dig into this, and we will as more news will come out. But interesting. I'm curious why we didn't break this on BDE. We should have seen this coming.
So I took my shot Thursday night. Let's go back to the roast again. My shtick was, you want to learn what's going on in the industry, you come to the roast. And right after I did the Pioneer Exxon joke, I said, hey, look over there. Case Van Hoff nervously looking over his shoulder at the Chevron table. So I guess
you broke it. You did break it.
I guess I just guessed wrong one.
Right.
It did take 48 hours for Case to text me back and say, I wasn't at the roast, but I did hear about the joke. He laughed. Yeah, no, I mean, the interesting thing for me, because one of my largest holdings in the Yates family portfolio was when I was at Kane, is Kraken. Kraken, big Bakken player. Kane backed Kraken, been in it, 10 years, something like that. So the Bakken aspect of this fascinates me, because Hess has as good or better position in the Bakken than anyone else out there. I mean, and so what happens there? Because truly, if we're talking consolidation and you didn't have egos, shareholders, all that, it would be like, okay, there needs to be one Bakken company. There's no reason to have, it's small enough that one company could run it. The longer laterals make a lot of sense there, et cetera. So, it's not an I think it's 175,000, 180,000 barrel a day asset for Hess. Is that a fit with Chevron? I don't know.
It's a decent add to base production.
Yeah.
Just in terms of magnitude.
So willy-nilly, you can't just sell it, but long-term, does Chevron really care about the Bakken, and does it want to become a consolidator there like it was in Colorado? I don't know.
It's interesting because a story came out concurrently with Hess, which actually before Hess, but an article with Chevron's Mike Wirth, CEO, he says, and the quote of the story is, quote, "We're not selling a product that is evil."
Yeah.
So, in priming the market and the story for an acquisition that's heavy oil and gas. Interesting.
Which we'll table it for another time, because we've explored it ad nauseum. What do the European counterparts in the peer group do?
Wow.
In competitive response. And so far, I think the only one to really explicitly sound off on that is YL, who said, we want to be as boring as possible.
Well, YL is trying to steer the ship this direction. Interesting. I just want to give y'all a day in the life of Mike Wirth.
So
this is interesting. Have y'all seen this? Mike Wirth, day in the life of Mike Wirth, CEO of Chevron, mover and shaker. He gets up at 3:45, wake up and go to the gym for a 90-minute workout. I didn't know he didn't look that tough, but man. 5:15, a cup of coffee.
All cardio. No.
A cup of coffee, reading half a dozen newspapers, including Digital Wildcatters podcast. First one he mentions. Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times. He says, quote, I like to have a context for what's going on in the world, but Digital Wildcatters is the only real news. 6 a.m. shower, head to the office. Wow. And then he has meetings. 6 p.m. back for dinner with my wife. My 4 children have left at home. Damn, he has 4 kids at home.
Wow, we could tell him what's causing that.
9 p.m. bed and reading. 10 o'clock sleep. So that dude is busy.
I saw him during, what's the CERAWeek, just passing through the Four Seasons lobby. He looks to be in very good health and very fit. So that's an interesting insight on
what he does.
I call it burning it at both ends in a very healthy way.
Yeah.
All right. So real quick, while we're on merger mania, just because this really rubbed me the wrong way. There was nothing wrong with that. Jeff Colgan, who is a political science and something about climate solutions, whatever, professor at Brown University, wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times, and he said, and I kid you not, that Exxon buying Pioneer was a threat to democracy.
Direct threat.
A direct threat
in the
to
headline.
democracy.
Well, I don't.
Seriously?
I know he's not. Maybe he is working for the independent drillers. Because one of the stories that has come out of there's a great article actually in the Wall Street Journal about this, about Sheffield and his great legacy. But one of the questions that has come up from the sale of Pioneer to Exxon has been the major independent drillers might face challenges in sustaining independently. So they're concerned maybe this is a potential end of an era dominated by independent frackers. I have an opinion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that concern. So maybe that New York Times hit piece was actually paid for by the Permian Basin.
I don't
Somebody
think,
out of Odessa.
I don't think there's anybody capable of playing that level of three-dimensional chess. It just seems
tic-tac-toe.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just increasingly a catch-all rebuttal to anything in terms of particularly what the oil and gas industry does, or those who are on the wrong side of the climate ledger do in terms of making the business better, responding to market incentives and what their shareholders want them to do. Any type of consolidation or concentration of assets power, despite the fact that the global super majors produce far less than 10% of oil production, that's the new kind of catchphrase that is intended to really generate or evoke a pretty emotional response. So everything is a threat to democracy that is fundamentally, that is a fundamental embodiment of what a democratic system allows.
Well, and I read the article, and his point is kind of the same thing you hear all the time, that, we as consumers shouldn't worry about the planet and stop using oil and gas. Big bad Exxon, et cetera, needs to stop investing it. I.e., it's the drug dealer's problem, not the consumer of the drug.
Right. Of course,
that's the problem. And so I think that was his threat, or that was his problem, is that Exxon's just doubling down. They say they're for net zero, but they're investing more in oil and gas. And again, I read the article. I may have fallen asleep in the middle of it, not completed it, but you never hear, here's the solution of how we do it so that people don't suffer today. You never hear that side.
So
of
interesting enough.
Or we're working on things that mitigate the problem you're seemingly concerned about, which is things like carbon capture.
Yeah, and we're really good at it. Why don't you?
Well, that's not what we meant.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got ExxonMobil, you've got Chevron on the other side of the pond. Interesting enough, a letter came out today, penned by over 130 businesses that represent over $1 trillion of revenue. In and lead up to COP28. So companies like IKEA, Volvo, eBay, Heineken, AstraZeneca, BT Group, Nestle, Unilever, Bayer, Orsted, of course. The letter saying that we need to know that they've urged world leaders to agree to a timeline to ditch fossil fuels. That's the letter that's coming out of all these companies that actually have really nothing industrial. They don't need per se fossil fuels, even though eBay uses a lot of bandwidth on those data centers.
Exactly.
And Heineken uses a lot of energy in Amsterdam to make beer.
My Volvo wouldn't run right now if
exactly.
Now, granted, they're saying they're all going electric, but
Isn't this interesting?
Yeah, no, it's. You know what it felt like to me when I read that article? That article was like, "Hey, consumer, I know you want to go net zero. Government, you got to do it," because they know the governments aren't going to get their act together.
No way.
China and India aren't going to agree to a carbon tax or anything that could put us on a path to
destroy their
net
economy.
zero.
There's no way they would do it.
Yeah, so that felt like, hey, it's not us, it's them. We want this. We're right there with you. Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. Kind of a marketing ploy.
Maybe it is.
Some 27-year-old intern in the marketing department wrote this letter. Hey, that's great. Let's sign off on it.
And remind us where COP28 will be held.
It's in the Middle East, brother. In a country that is one of the largest producers of oil and gas.
So again, I'll go back to my roast remarks because I was quite proud of my 7 minutes of shtick. But I told the whole story about the threat to democracy, and I was like, "Come on, let's be real. Bunch of Dallas oil bros getting rich. It's a boom to hookers and blow." I mean, let's
Speaking of, I'm glad you brought this up. It's a perfect segue into hookers and blow, Chuck. I know we're sad about it, the Strohs, but there's another story that I read, and I was meant to text you saying, Chuck, I am sorry. Bad news, because I know you're interested, but an LA home almost next door to the Playboy Mansion just sold. And I know you had your eye on that house. So I just want to say I'm sorry you missed out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate that a ton.
Yeah.
All right. I don't get any of these floating storage numbers and what they mean, but anybody want to crack at it?
Just more broadly, you had the headline of we're easing sanctions on Venezuela. This is a bit of a 6-month probationary period. It's announced, I think, over the weekend, where the Venezuelans are now free to export and sell for cash wherever they choose, with the condition that free and fair elections and the participation of previously banned and some jailed political opponents are allowed by Maduro. I think there was a meeting in Barbados between the opposition and Maduro's ruling party that stopped short on Maduro's side of agreeing to allow previous opposition candidates to run again. So we'll see. There's some background unanimous or anonymous comments from State Department officials said, we'll reimpose sanctions so fast it'll make your head swim. If this doesn't, the free and fair elections, if Maduro doesn't comply, was basically the message. The other message coming out was, with this easing of sanctions, Venezuela is now open for business. There are a lot of frozen assets there, diminished value by some international, including American players. And so we'll see, what does it all mean for the global oil trade? I don't think there's an immediate displacement of or replacement of the barrels that OPEC has taken off the market. There's been decade plus of neglect and underinvestment. And so, this is more, I think, about, one, the optics of it will have an effect short term going into an election year, and two, allowing the Venezuelans to start to generate some cash. They've got a $90 billion foreign debt obligation, which really kind of segues into the next story.
So I mean, y'all saw Monty Python on the Holy Grail, right?
Yes.
Remember when he comes
Flesh wound.
when he comes up to that castle, King Arthur does, and he's like, "I would like you, brave knight, to join me in my quest for the Holy Grail." And the dude's up there, "We already got one." It's very nice, you know? And I mean, just the absurdity of that guy turning around going, "I told him we already got one." I mean, Venezuela's negotiating this agreement. Oh, we'll be allowed to sell oil. Well, and we have to agree to certain political prisoners being released. Okay. He just said we had to release these idiots, set them free, whatever. God, this is such a windfall to Venezuela. I mean, I can't even believe this is on the table. I mean, this is totally, I need low oil prices going into the election. There is no justification.
Absolutely.
Bad people. It's not the cleanest oil. If you wanted
dirty,
environmentally clean oil, you don't want Venezuela. I mean, they're heavy stuff.
Our refining complex does.
But Exxon and Shell's refineries on the Gulf Coast love this shit.
Yeah,
I mean, they're
need
set
this
up.
Shit.
They need it. They actually can't refine.
That's what, certainly Citgo is built for, and the Gulf Coast refining complex is the highest complexity index in the world, which means heavy sour is where we get the most bang for the buck over time.
Should we bid for Citgo, by the way, the three of us?
There we go.
Let's think about how we can compete against Buc-ee's. If we turn it into like a Buc-ee's competitor.
Nice.
Strippers.
Oh, good grief. There we go. Perfect.
I'm out.
We're all going to get divorced, and GF is going to deny you, so that would be bad.
That would be bad.
So, all right, let's move forward.
But yeah, I can't figure out what we're doing with Venezuela. That just, to me,
I'll take the under.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a neighbor in Nantucket, and we were chatting. He's like, "Yeah, I'm raising a fund, and my partner's a big Venezuelan investor. He's close to Maduro." I was like, "Okay, great. When's the fund closing?" And it never closed, and nothing ever happens there, ever.
How many cycles or incidents over the last 50, 60 years of nationalization and confiscation in some cases and liberalization have there been? At least two.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
I'm going to risk capital in assets that I have almost forgotten about.
Yeah.
That may be frozen or otherwise kind of in uncertain ownership state. I've got other things to do elsewhere.
I mean, I feel the same way about Mexico. I mean,
I was going to say, go right to Mexico.
They celebrate Expropriation Day down in Richmond, Texas. I mean, it's like, it's like a big deal. And so, yeah, that's
shoes on the other foot with Citgo, right? Citgo is a Venezuelan owned through opposition party controlled and appointed holding companies. Currently, there was a ruling. They've been protected from an auction to satisfy arbitration awards to creditors, and there are a number of creditors that now has been removed by virtue of a ruling that these holding companies and the entities that own them are de facto or alter ego Venezuelan entities, and Venezuela has debt obligations that U.S. creditors, among them ConocoPhillips and Exxon, are suing to get redress.
Mm-hmm.
And now the judge has said we're going to move forward with an auction. Venezuela will be left with nothing if it plays out like the expert observations are saying. This starts sometime early next year. If they can't get repayment agreements with their creditors in place before the winning bid is announced, Venezuela probably loses all of any kind of claim on the $13 billion asset that is Citgo, which is about 800,000 barrels a day of mostly heavy Ven type crude refining, 4,200 retail stations, plus a big sign at Fenway Park. And so, we'll see how that plays out. But again, it's just emblematic of what's going on with the intractable Venezuelan debt situation. There's hope that, these sanctions that we just talked about before this would somehow satisfy or substitute for an auction of Citgo, whereby Venezuela stands to lose everything. And, in the background, people are saying there's kind of slim to none chance of that being the case. Yeah. So it will get auctioned. You've got a handful of players that are cited: MPC, Motiva, and of course the other big U.S. Refining owners, Valero, et cetera. So that's another part of the mess that is Venezuela.
Every American student at some point should have to study Venezuela for like six weeks straight. That is what socialism does. And it repeats itself. It's just not good. Not good. All righty. Well, are we going to make our way to the prayer vigil for Colin's prostate, given that he's gotten another injury and has left us alone?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Any final thoughts? Or are we all just gearing up for Game 7?
I mean, I think we need to gear up. This is big.
We need to pregame.
We need the cold-bloodedest version of El Reptil, Christian Javier, to show up tonight.
Yeah. I will say
and score more than 2 runs.
I will say this. I'm happy going into the bottom of the 9th with Altuve at bat representing the winning run. I will be happy to do that. If we could skip straight to there.
I'd rather be up 10-0, but hey, I'll take whatever.
The good news is if they get over tonight and if the Phillies close it out and represent the National League and create what will be a rematch of the 2022 World Series, the World Series starts in Philadelphia, which means there's 4 away games in Philly and 3 home games.
There we go.
If it goes 7.
We can hope for
Love
that.
it.
So, all right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll see you next week.